Hello and welcome back to the Undercut podcast. We're back ahead of a brand new season of Formula One, and it's time to preview the first Grand Prix of the year, the Australian Grand Prix. I'm your host, Jesse Billington, and joining me once again is none other than Mr. Thiemo Albus Daly. How are you?
Pretty good, thank you, Mr. Billington. How about yourself?
Yeah, not too bad. It's been a busy day in the office, getting a few things planned out. A couple of bits and pieces planned out for far, far later into the season. But yeah, just sort of otherwise relatively straightforward. Looking forward to a couple of photo shoots I've got coming up and some road tests. So yeah, the usual sort of levels of chaos that go on in my life. But importantly for this episode, we are joined by founder of the Paddock Chronicle, Caitlin Noble. Welcome to the podcast, and how are you?
Hello, I'm great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, we've got a lot to go through. So I think this is possibly going to be one of the more exciting rounds of the calendar to sort of get on the podcast for, because there's a lot to talk about. We're going to gloss over most of what's happened since Abu Dhabi, bar the past couple of weeks, because we sort of touched on testing when we were laying down our predictions. But there's been a lot happening, so we ought to really dive into it. And there's some passing news. Bernie Ecclestone being worried that Formula One is becoming less of a drivers' championship this year and is leaning too much towards Formula E, and that it will lose fans as a result, which I think is kind of nonsensical. Drive to Survive has returned for its eighth season on Netflix, and I'm not going to say anything about that because I have ongoing communications with the production company behind that, and I don't want to jeopardize things. And there's a very real chance that we might not go racing in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia thanks to the ongoing conflict in the region. I'll touch on that. Or have you actually compiled a load of the news from further on down here, Timo? You have, by the look of
No,
things.
not all of it. No, just little bits that there wasn't much else on it, so I thought I'd just throw it in there.
Yeah, so obviously the what is it, the 1,812 kilometers of Qatar has been essentially cancelled, and the WEC season will be starting over in Imola. Obviously due to the fact that it's very tricky to get in and out of Qatar at the moment. I think McLaren, Mercedes, and Pirelli actually had teams on the ground still testing in Bahrain that they were able to sort of safely extricate from the area. So yeah, certainly a situation to keep monitoring. Friend of the show, meanwhile, Otmar Zafnauer has joined VAR in Formula 2 as their CEO and managing partner, and Alex Dunn has made the very bold choice of joining the Alpine Driver Academy. Um, there were possibly better options available. One might
Well, he
get,
he had a better option in the left, and
yeah.
this has been his next move. So fascinating logic behind that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, famously, the recent drivers to have all gone through the Alpine Drivers Academy have all driven for Alpine since then. And there's also talk of something called superclipping in Formula One. So that's where we're going to start with the news round this week. Superclipping, Timo.
Yeah, superclipping, something that we all pretend we've known about all along and have not just become experts on in the last 10 minutes or so, ever since this first came about in the news, which it's basically superclipping is the state in which the 2026 cars harvest energy while the driver is at full throttle. Well, superclipping, not all of the power goes directly to the rear wheels. Part of it's stored via the MGUK for deployment later. And so superclipping mainly occurs at the end of the straights and in high-speed corners. But under the 26 regulations, the energy that can be harvested via superclipping is currently limited to 250 kilowatts of the total 350. So Andreas Tiller is coming out and saying at the moment it's obviously limited to that 250, but all the conditions are there to up it to the full 350 while the driver is at full throttle, meaning that the driver doesn't have to lift and coast as much, which is something we obviously don't want to see too much because we want fast racing and all that good stuff. But it's a bit of a give and take. And the interesting thing is that the impact will change from one venue to another, and any changes that may happen are up to FIA. So again, don't know if it's going to happen. If it's not, when we might be able to see anything on that one, and we'll just have to wait and see essentially. So in theory, could be a good change, but I guess they're waiting to see what happens in the first two or three races before deciding if we need to speed things up a bit and give that potential. And if that doesn't work, then that's going to be a potential head scratcher.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because I think obviously Ferrari have got a bit of an advantage here with both of their drivers very well versed in the art of lift and coast. But I think I understand the tech of it, I understand the principle of it, I understand how it works. However, I don't think it's going to be the fastest way to go racing. And I think there is going to be it's going to drive a bit of innovation because obviously while the power ceiling, so the 350 kilowatts available for deployment at any given point in time, is going to be capped and monitored, there's going to be teams that are clever in how they charge up and reach that state. So it's not necessarily going to be how much you can deploy, it's going to be how well you can charge it, and the better you're able
It's
to
frustratingly not agreeing with Jeremy Clarkson in terms of power and
Mm.
just using it and hoping that solves all of your problems, and you're more likely going to have to take a Hammond or May approach and think about it slightly.
Well, this is the thing. The better you are at, say, charging your battery and essentially regenerating that power, the less clipping you're going to have to do, and therefore the better your race car is going to be. I think that's what we're going to see here. Is we're going to see this sort of rushing tech change as teams go, well, hang on, if we uprate MGUK units, if we change pulley ratios, if we change harvesting rates, we're going to see teams be able to charge up to that ceiling quicker and therefore have to super clip less. Also, I think this opens for some sort of great illustration featuring the famous Windows assistant of Clippy. I think he's going to make a return as well sometime during this, but that's a reference for 1990s heads, I feel.
Or
I
I think we
actually
all
know
just
that
about
one.
understand that
So,
here.
yeah,
Yeah.
finally I know one. I actually do. I'm getting to that point of my age that I actually understand these older things, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm finally old. It's happened.
Terrifying to be old enough to understand Clippy, but I think
Yeah.
it's going to be an interesting thing that I think also have we still got natural aspirated cars with these really exciting exhausts, I don't think people would mind too much because it'll be a bit like the blown diffuser system where drivers are still on throttle on power through a bend, but it's not being deployed, it's being set to charge. And you'll have those sort of great moments where you've got drivers going through turns absolutely flat, foot flat to the floor, not necessarily going anywhere very quickly. And it's going to sound like the good old days where think back to the bronze, the blown diffusers, where you had sort of the Red Bull beansing it into sort of turn 1, 2 at Monza, and you could still hear Sebastian Vettel on the throttle and just banging it down the shifts, and the engine just absolutely screaming away because all it's doing is dumping that air through the diffuser, and it would have been more interesting if we had better sounding engines,
So
but
there's potential for a very funny compare and contrast clip after the Australian Grand Prix, just to put those side by side to each other and see one sounds like and compare it to the other and how well or badly that's potentially aged.
because you've got a slightly sweeping section through sort of the opening sector essentially of
Mm.
Albert Park. That would be where you'd get your best comparison, where you're trying to moderate your speed, but you'll be doing it with your foot absolutely welded to the floorboards to try and keep the motor spinning to generate that kinetic energy that's then later stored and then deployed once you get to essentially, is it Lakeside Drive, isn't it, that sort of runs along the top side of Albert Park? And then that'd be where you'd be charging up for your deployment through that sort of first sector. So that'd be where you'd hear something similar to the blown diffuser systems of sort of days of yore when things sounded a lot more exciting. But
Would you be hearing it at all on the way to turn 6 to try and give you a nice segue?
well, maybe you actually would, thinking about how the layout goes. I think you would hear the super clipping on your way into turn 6, which has been in your corner, which is a far more interesting sort of title for this section. Which is that we've got a turn named for Laura Mueller, Esteban Ocon's race engineer at Haas, and Hannah Schmitz, the head of race strategy at Red Bull. They've become the first women to have a Formula One circuit corner named after them, with turn 6 in Melbourne to be dedicated to them at the Australian Grand Prix in celebration of International Women's Day, which was that today or is that later this week? I've lost track of where it is because I'm terrible like that.
I am also the wrong person to ask for that. Every day seems to be a day for something these days, so I have lost track of all of them, and I miss most
I,
of them.
I barely know what day of the week it is at any point in my life. Never
We are an
mind which
informed
day.
podcast here today. We know all of the important information we know, but the important thing is that this is happening, and as long as you kind of remember on Sunday and maybe pay attention to see if there's any kind of signs that it has actually been, I don't know if there's like a special design on the corner that if there's just big pictures of Hannah and Laura's face there or what the deal is, but I'm hoping there's clues that you could see on the broadcast.
There
I'd
might be
like to
some,
think so.
yeah, although it feels like this could come off as another one of Formula One's just sort of vague hand waving in the area of doing something positive just to sort of appease people and ultimately not actually doing anything meaningful with it.
It is a little bit insane that they're the first women to get this accolade, considering how many women have been in F1 since the start, really, when you think about
Yeah.
it. You go back and see all the drivers' wives back in the 60s and 70s with the stopwatches, for example, and they were instrumental in dealing with lap times, if nothing else. And then, you watch everything else since then, and you go, how has it taken this long? Good that it's happened, but, it's sort of, like you say, is it just more of a, we've done something gesture?
I mean, at least Brands Hatch has long had the Desiree Wilson grandstand, like something that's actually meaningful and is there all year round and used at a variety of major motorsports events. Like it's at least a proper homage in that sense, as opposed to what might just be a case of Crofty forgets to call the turn six its actual name, or is it actually been given the name in your corner, or is it just going to be turn
That was
six?
I think that was the movement behind it that they named the project. Whether or not, like, what the actual corner is called, if it's like Muller Corner, which I feel like is a missed opportunity if ever there was one, then that would be what they would call it. But I'm not 100% sure.
There is a missing opportunity there for Muller Corner. I'm surprised that that isn't a sponsor somewhere on the Haas, to be fair, because we've
Why
got
have I not been hired?
we've got
That
the
was
shark
excellent.
fin back on the engine cover as well. That's perfect branding space for a Muller Corner. But again, this is why we're not allowed to run Formula One teams. Um, anyway, with that out of the way, we'll dive into something that's
We
a bit more
could run this Formula One team.
we could probably do a better job running this Formula One team. This is a bit of conjecture, but there's a lot that
It
grounds it
probably
in
won't be by
reality.
Sunday.
Yeah, Aston Martin potentially will not be running in Melbourne. Early rumours from a couple of well-placed sources suggest that the team may not actually run in the Grand Prix, citing a lack of parts as well as outright uncompetitiveness. It suggested that they will take to the grid, run the formation lap, and then peel in akin to Indianapolis 2005. And I will say it is worth taking this with a pinch of salt. Sometimes my sort of news hounding for this podcast pans out really well, and I'm later proven to be incredibly right. Sometimes it doesn't go strictly to plan. So again, we're waiting to hear proper confirmation of this. But no, it's interesting. The Aston Martin didn't look good in testing, and obviously at the moment there is with the ongoing geopolitical situation spreading across the globe, making it very difficult to get from the UK to Australia because right in the middle of it is essentially an emerging war zone. I don't know if you've seen that I mentioned it actually here. Ferrari and Toro Rosso struggled to get a lot of their team members and kit out there because the direct flight routes from Italy are blocked. And I think that Carlos Sainz's manager and trainer had to take a very circuitous route from Spain that took nearly sort of 2 days to get to Australia via different flights to try and make their way around it. So there's been a lot of hurdles getting stuff out there. So if Aston Martin have also struggled to get bits out there, we'll wait and see. But Ferrari and Toro Rosso have been granted, well, essentially all the teams I think have been granted a reprise of essentially the curfew that means you have to be only working on the cars for this period of time. That has been lifted for this weekend just to give everyone a fair chance to get things built up as and when stuff arrives, because it's a bit touch and go at the moment. Some teams have got cars built up, some teams haven't. We'll wait and see how it pans out. Another non-appearer this weekend is Ferrari's rotisserie wing, which is apparently actually worth keeping, but undergoing ongoing evolution back at Maranello. So it might be run this weekend. They might run a stock rear wing before they figure out a finessed version of the rotisserie item. If we happen to make it to Bahrain, that's the early anticipation of when we should see it. If not, it'll be here no later than Canada. So there could be an interesting turn of form for
I
them.
wonder if the play would be to wait and then Bahrain doesn't happen and we go back to back Imola and Mugello instead, and it's just they deploy it, win both Italian Grand Prix at the early point of the year with the help of the rotisserie wing, and they just look like a bunch of legends.
Well, I don't think we're going back to Mugello, but Portimao has been lined
I
up.
know, but I just like the idea of going back to Mugello with these cars, and just because it would be funny to give Ferrari even more of an advantage.
See, it's annoying that Turkey's been sort of dragged into this because I think running a sort of kebab spit liveried rear wing on the Ferrari at Turkey would be incredible. But unfortunately, that doesn't look like it's going to be a viable option. Imola and Portimao are the ones that have been
You
sort
can't
of
really. There's not really an Italian dish that comes to mind that you could do that with
do
either.
want a spit.
It's
No,
frustrating.
the only closest thing I can think of is German doner kebab, which would involve us going to
We
like
shall go to the Nürburgring. It is
Nürburgring
decided.
GP circuit or Hockenheim, yeah, to bring it back. Getting all hungry again. But no, speaking of Germany, Mercedes-powered teams will have petrol for the weekend. Petronas' sustainable offering for the season has now been certified by the FIA, joining Shell, which powers the Ferrari engines, ExxonMobil, which will be used by the Red Bull Ford units, and BP, which powers Audi. So another problem that could trip up Aston Martin this weekend is they don't have any petrol that the FIA will let them use. Everyone was allowed to run their petrol during the practice and testing sessions at Spain and Bahrain before the season, just as a chance to bed it in, make any final tweaks. But all the paperwork from Aramco has not arrived yet. And this isn't just a case of you have to give them like a litre of petrol to test. The whole testing process for the fuel, because it's now got to be sustainable from source to tailpipe. So they're having to check how the fuel is shipped, how the fuel is prepared, where they're getting the raw bulk ingredients from. It's a very detailed and technical thing and has a lot of hurdles to it, whether or not, and it's baffling that Aramco haven't got this nailed down, considering they were
You
supplying.
imagine they sort out all of their other issues, and then that's what stops them on Sunday.
Well, Aramco was supplying the 50% sustainable fuel for Formula 2 and Formula 3 for the past few seasons. They know what they should be doing here. So it's one questioning how much how far wrong they've gone with this process as well. So there's a lot of questions still surrounding the Aston Martin project, and we're what 3 days away from the Grand Prix.
It's impressive for all the wrong reasons, and I'm amazed that we've been able to say that this early in a season. I think that's possibly the earliest in a season we've ever said that, and Alpine existed last year.
We haven't said anything bad about Cadillac yet, really.
They've not given anything bad for us to say about them, to be fair.
Been quite
yet.
under the radar. They've been
Yeah.
quite chilled out actually, which I'm quite surprised about. I was thinking there'd be a lot more hype, but it seems to just be just chilling. I feel as if they might actually. I think I've got a feeling they'll be an underdog. Actually, I've got a good feeling for once.
The Ferrari power unit looks strong. I think Dan Tauris was one of the right people to move over to it. He's been long engaged with motorsport. He's not like it's just someone they've brought in because he was at Cadillac. We saw him at St. Pete when he was over with the Andretti IndyCar sort of setup. And again, he's someone who is genuinely passionate and engaged with motorsport. He's the right sort of person to move into that seat. So a worthwhile pick. Next up on the sort of big list of news, we've mentioned already the FIA having cancelled the curfew ahead of the weekend for force majeure reasons. And yeah, really interesting that this is possibly one of the first times we've seen that happen for quite some time. I can't think of the last time they've lifted.
Can't think of the last time we would have had this, because the obvious one that comes to mind would be 2020 Australia, when we thought we were still doing that, but then it was if anything, yeah, have this but don't come. Whereas I don't know when the last time we would have had that, if we've ever had that. I mean, you'd have to go back a fair way, I'd imagine. There's nothing obvious that comes to mind.
Yeah, there's probably someone who's better written up on this who'd be able to inform us in the comments. But yeah, like we mentioned at the top of the show, WEC have cancelled their Qatar round, the 1812K endurance race, which was supposed to take place 26th through 28th of March, and instead their season will start in the much safer Imola on the 17th through 19th of April. Though I think it would be funny if they instead tried to run 1,812 kilometers around something like Brands Hatch. That would be incredible. They did used to run a 1,000 kilometers of Brands Hatch. It was the BOAC 1,000 kilometers race there, and with Group 2 sports cars. And I think it'd be incredible to see modern LMGT cars running around the tiny Brands Hatch, because that'd just be incredible. Watching like
How many times could you lap someone, I wonder?
well, how long is
in a
Brands
space of
Hatch?
time?
How long is Brands Hatch, the Grand Prix circuit? Brands
It's still not massive.
circuit. I think it's less than 5 kilometers, surely. The Indy circuit is 1.9. Here we go. The Grand Prix circuit is 3.916 kilometers. So they've got to do what I say it was 1812 divided by
Yeah.
3.9.
Yeah, I'm not doing that math.
Is 462.7 laps. So reasonably, you could get in at least, call it 200 laps, I think, assuming
It'd
you're
be like one of the short ovals in NASCAR where you're going for a pit stop and you come out 5 laps down.
Well, European NASCAR series did used to run at Brands Hatch on the Indy circuit, which was just a little kidney bean lane. And that used to be good fun, actually. I've seen that before. And again, it's a very tight and short circuit, akin to, was it Martinsville is the really steeply banked one? I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Richmond as well is also another one of those tiny NASCAR circuits where it's sort of like you could line up 12 cars and
You do look at it and you go, what was the point in building this? You can't really do anything.
This was for when NASCARs used to be small, sort of like the inverse of wagon wheels. They used to be bigger. But anyway, speaking of more important things, we head into the weekend. We've already mentioned Imola and Portimao potentially taking place over Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, and Pirelli are bringing along the C3, C4, and C5 tyre to Melbourne, which is a bit of a wise choice, as it's been absolutely tipping it down in Australia at the moment. Obviously, they're going through their sort of or into their autumn, so end of their summer into their autumn, and it's changeable weather conditions. We saw those last year, and it produced a rather exciting race. It's undecided as to whether we're going to see that again. But again, we've got the full range of feeder series running this year. We've got Formula 3, Formula 2 there. We should have had display laps from, I think it was a 2003 Jaguar, but that's had to be swapped to a Ford-powered Lola because the Jaguar has broken in accordance with its previous Formula 1 record of unreliability. So there's not going to be a lot really to rubber the circuit in. And bear in mind that it is a park and public road for most of the year. That combined with water does make things very difficult indeed. The next one is something I haven't fully confirmed, and that's Valtteri Bottas potentially having to not serve his 5-second grid penalty that he earned for crashing into Kevin Magnussen at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix in 2024. The FIA amended the rule last summer, now stating that such penalties have to be served within a year of notice. So obviously that year has now lapsed. So
True, but I wonder if it just means anything after the
after that
amendments in the
rule
summer
change, yeah.
and doesn't include anything before that, because chances are you wouldn't have to apply that to many people before then, because who would you? And then Bottas enters the chat.
Yeah, so I'm waiting to see what happens, whether or not there will be a 5-place grid penalty, but immediately that'll only become a 3-place grid penalty when Aston Martin pull in at the end of the formation lap. So who's to say this might still work out quite nicely for Valtteri? And meanwhile, while speaking of qualifying, obviously we now have 2 additional cars that should be running, taking to the grid. This means that qualifying will still run in 3 phases, Q1, Q2, Q3, booting out 6, and then 6 drivers, leaving qualifying 3 as a top 10 shootout, as it has been since we introduced this format. Qualifying 3 will now also run for 13 minutes, not 12. They've got a little bit more time. Obviously, I think this is where the new power units take a lot of time to build up, charge up, get ready. Just helps to have that additional minute in there just to get things prepared. Equally, they've also ditched the 2-stop strategy for Monaco because
It didn't work.
it didn't
It's
work.
terrible.
Yeah, I guess also the cars are smaller now, so you can overtake around Monaco. So who needs the 2-stop strategy to force overtakes?
Also, I was having this conversation earlier, and I was thinking, I think Monaco may be the first race in June after the FIA rule on the compression ratios comes into effect. So in theory, you could not have all of the Mercedes powered engines at that race, which means less cars, smaller cars, more chance of overtaking. We could have a really good Monaco this year if some calamitous things happen.
Yeah, if we get rid of Williams, Mercedes, Alpine,
McLaren.
McLaren. Anyone else?
No,
No.
but I mean that's still plenty to be getting on with. That's 8
Yeah.
cars.
I
Yeah.
might finally enjoy one of Monaco's races. It might finally happen that I'm not absolutely just rooting for quali. Might
And
eventually
if you take
happen.
Aston Martin out of the equation, as we might still have to at that point, down to 10 immediately,
There's gonna be less
everyone's
finishes in
guaranteed
this
points, and then you just have an absolute free for all.
there's gonna be less finishes at this Monaco Grand Prix than there was in 1996. This is gonna be incredible.
I'd say, and then those 10 cars do what F2 did last year and just bin it into the first
Yeah.
corner immediately.
They all absolutely send it into turn. Was it 1996 Monaco? Is that what I'm thinking of? Was that
I
the
think
one?
it's, yeah, I think, yeah, it's
Olivier Panis
96.
one, wasn't it? In the rain.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, Olivier Panis, David Coulthard, and Johnny Herbert, and that was it. That was like the only they were the only people to actually finish it as well. Jean Alesi
Hmm.
still credited with the fastest lap, despite not actually making it to the end of the race. Incredible scenes indeed. Yeah, and it's so annoying because
But
Heinz
we've,
finished just a lap down, but then eventually withdrew after damage. But no, it's looking like a
we've got a while to go before then, though.
yeah, we've got a lot to get through before then, potentially not including Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. We genuinely don't know. Strange time if you're the Goodyear blimp as well, because this all kicked off while the Goodyear blimp was transiting through the area on its way to, I think it was China at the time. So yeah, I don't
I
know if
would
you've
not
seen
have been
it.
one caught up in that.
Yeah, I don't know how fast a blimp moves, but I don't think it can outrun an F-14. So yeah, challenging times. Um, Or to revert to a favourite phrase from 2020, unprecedented times indeed, and perfectly timed with new regulations just for an added bit of spice. Speaking of an added bit of spice, it's time to lay
I
down
was
some.
wondering how you were going to get a segue in here.
Oh, it's clever. I'm clever about this. With an added bit of spice to manage, it's time to lay down some predictions, and we'll kick off as we always do, having just mentioned the reformatted qualifying process, pole position. Thiemo, I'll let you start.
Well, as anyone who listened to our predictions for 2026 episode that came out last week will know, I have jumped firmly aboard the Ferrari hype train. So I think Charles Leclerc gets pole position for Ferrari. He's just good at getting pole position. I'm not saying Hamilton isn't. He's obviously the all-time greatest at getting pole positioned, but I think Charles is going to get it. It's going to be a fun ding dong between the two of them that's going to last the whole year. So let's give him first blood on Saturday at least.
I think that's an interesting one. I've gone for George Russell to get pole position, principally because I think that the Mercedes has got enough in it to be able to build over a lap to get towards a fast lap. But I think it could come undone a little bit in the Grand Prix for them. But I think over a lap with a good run up, the Mercedes stands a fair chance. And I think George is going to come swinging out the gates this year because, much like sort of last year when he was really able to start sort of contesting for a lot, I think a completely sort of clean slate of regulations opens the field to a lot of people really trying. And if anyone, he's possibly best placed to really start capitalizing on a bit of a shaken up
I
field.
could use that same argument for Charles, though. I think he needs that cleaner slate badly as well because he wants to repeat 22 at the start, but make it last the whole season this time. And this would be a way to go about that.
Mm. And all the previous Ferrari world champions were married when they won. So obviously many
You
happy
have jumped
returns.
into that theory of thought, have you?
Yeah, many happy returns to Charles and Alex, as obviously they got married. Was it last weekend, wasn't it? And wonderful looking ceremony.
Recreated the scene from Stuart Little too.
Yes, yeah. I can only hope that when I finally come to get married, I have enough money to get hold of a Ferrari 250 Testarossa to drive away from my wedding ceremony in. But I strongly suspect
Will
that.
it will it be followed by a short prison sentence afterwards for Grand Theft Auto?
Yes, yeah, there will be someone from the Ferrari Museum going, give it back, that's not yours." But no, yeah, for me, George Russell, pole position. Caitlin?
I interestingly have also gone for Charles Leclerc, which I was not actually expecting to have put that answer down. And then the more I
And
thought
so
about it,
you wrote it down. How are you not expecting it?
because I going into the season, I was like, I don't know. I didn't know how it was going to go initially, and then I thought, I think it's going to be Merck on top. And then the more I thought about it over the last few days, I was like, nah, I actually think it's going to be Ferrari. I do think it's going to be Ferrari, but specifically Charles. And I think, again, it's coming off of the regulation changes for one, but I think it's going to really suit their quality pace anyway. And I also think he's going to be so buzzing after his wedding that it's just going to it's going to keep going, and he's going on that same direction of just having pole position, and then it's going to go probably downhill slightly for them potentially as the season goes on. But I do think he's going to start off on a good note, and I do think it's going to be very interesting to see how this pans out with the changes in place.
Because of course, Mercedes later will have to retest their engine compression ratios at running temperature as well. And this is going to be the important thing that potentially decides whether or not they've got a legitimate power unit they can carry forwards. It hasn't been flagged for Ferrari, interestingly enough. So we'll be curious to see sort of how that development goes on through the season. But I think Ferrari possibly have the strongest package out of the gate. But again, for Formula One's a development war. It's whether or not they can stay on top of it. Mercedes and Red Bull previously have been two teams that have been able to pick their way out of a hole, let's say. Certainly Mercedes turned around what was a bit of a dog at the change of the last regulations, and Red Bull have found themselves to be able to sort of engineer their way out of things. But the guy who used to do that's at a different team and struggling to engineer his way out of that. So who knows? We'll see. But that's still to come. After qualifying, of course, there is the race itself, which will lead to a podium. And Thiemo, you have elected the following three drivers to stand atop it.
It'll be a Ferrari 1-2 because of course it's going to be. So it's going to be Hamilton out in front. So I don't think he's going to be too far behind Leclerc in qualifying. Leclerc will still come home in second, and then it's Australia, and we need an Aussie up there. So Piastri makes sense.
It's reasonable. I've
It's
gone.
it's the most sensible I'm gonna be for most of these predictions. When I say sensible, I think we've got the potential this year to be more outlandish than we usually are, which is also saying something. But we'll get to that with the wild predictions, I think, possibly later.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the weekend where we're predicting a Bottas, Perez, and Albon podium or something. Um, I've gone for, though, something a bit more reasonable for my first podium of the year. Charles Leclerc stand atop the rostrum, then George Russell in second, and Kimi Antonelli in third, because the Mercedes is good and under current regulations legal. And I think again, Antonelli has done a season, he's got his feet under the table. Maybe this is going to be a style of car that suits him as well. It's going to be a bit more slidey, a bit more skatey, one that he has to drive. Having not long come out of feeder series and karting, he's very much used to a car that you have to be very dynamic with. It could be a car we see suit his driving tendencies. So,
And
yeah,
he was the only rookie to survive the Grand Prix last year.
yes. Apart from Fernando Alonso, the eternal rook. Oh no, Alonso didn't either. Of course.
Oh,
Nope.
Ah, Alonso's not going to survive it this year. Well, he's not going to take part in it this year. But yeah, no, Antonelli has good form around Australia. So yeah, fingers crossed for him. Caitlin, your podium.
so I've gone for George Russell in P1. I do think he's gonna clinch it from Charles because I do believe that there are probably still some slight issues within the Ferrari team. I don't think that they have necessarily disappeared over the course of the break, but I do think there may be a little change in that area. And then I've also gone for Lewis Hamilton in P3.
So still a double Ferrari podium with Russell in there. It's interesting how close our early predictions are. I think this is the
I
thing. So
also find it interesting that none of us have put Verstappen or Norris in the mix there, considering they were the top two in the championship last year. I'm wondering what's happening to them in our situations.
I can't see Norris continuing that form over a season and into a second season. And because look at the form he had at the start of 2025 off the back of a relatively strong finish to 2024 when he had sort of sent a bit of a dummy challenge against Verstappen for the title. 2025, it took him a couple of races to get his feet back under the table. And again, we're doing that at a McLaren that famously has struggled every time we've seen a change in regulations for the best part of a decade and a half now, maybe 2 decades.
And they're just wiping their brow, being glad they haven't gone with Honda this time around.
Yeah. So we've got a very unknown McLaren and a driver that takes a lot of time to get sort of back settled into a Grand Prix season. So
Yeah.
I'm struggling to back Norris coming into this. And again, Verstappen, I don't have questions about his form. I just have a lot of questions about that Red Bull. I know so little about it. We know so little about what their engine is. And obviously, they've got electrics supplied by Ford. It's a very unknown package. I feel like we know more about the Audi lineup and the Audi sort of project than we do about how Red Bull have gone about making engines. Audi were very vocal when they said, we've got a single cylinder test mule going, we've been able to prove reliability with sort of dynamics, with materials, with thermoregulation, and then sort of were building up to it. And they came out very early on and said, we think we're behind on power production with just the ICE unit. Audi have been very open and sort of confident about things. Red Bull haven't. And that I think is
Either that or they're playing the same game Aston Martin are and are playing a hell of a good game of bluff.
if
I do
Aston
just
Martin, yeah, pull this out, this is incredible sandbagging.
Yeah, I do just think as well, it's very strange that have been so quiet. I think, given the nature that the kind of team that they usually are, I do think it is very interesting that they've been so quiet with the car, and there's been very little coming out, and that does
Maybe is this
just
just what
make
the
me
team's
suspicious.
like without Horner and Marco? Now that we've got
Yeah,
rid of
that's
both of them
true.
for quite a while, maybe it was always just those two because you'd always see at least one of them in the media doing something, and now you've got Meckies, and he doesn't strike me as that kind of a character.
True. It
Yeah.
might just be a separate approach, a different kind of approach heading into the year. I'm very interested to see how it will play out, though, overall.
There's still very much the brand architecture of Red Bull in place, which is loud, vibrant, making a noise, showing off a lot. And regardless of who you've got steering that ship, I don't think you can change what the brand is supposed to be in the same way that sort of Mercedes and Ferrari are very much sort of personified in the way they represent and hold themselves. Ferrari has always very much been Ferrari, regardless of who's helmed the ship. And you could say a bit of the same with Mercedes. It's not necessarily a product of Toto Wolff, it's a product of sort of German engineering, this very sort of neutral, sort of straightforward, straight talking style of production. I th There might be more going on behind the scenes at Red Bull than we think. And given the amount of brain drain we saw towards the end of certainly last season and the season before, I don't think they're in a particularly strong place. And I think we're going to see them remarkably close to maybe their sister team and a lot closer than I think we want to, which is going to be a struggle.
I suppose the silver lining to that is that if they do have a bit of a rough and ready car, Hadjar will let us know on team radio.
Yes. Yeah. Hajar will let everyone know on team radio or otherwise. I have an interesting
But he
feeling.
won't need to turn on the team radio, actually.
No,
We'll
you'll
just
be able
hear
to
it.
hear him as he comes past. Sort of, this is,
You'll be trying to figure out who's on the throttle and who's not going around these corners. It'll just be Hadjar screaming.
yeah. Is that him clipping? No, that's him swearing. No, it's going to be very interesting, and I think it's going to be a strange season for Lindblad to try and prove himself as a rookie coming into this with so little of a track record in Formula Two, and then coming into a huge regulation shift at a time when we again know so
I
little.
suppose the pressure's not on him, though, at the same time
Yeah.
because of all of this going on. So if it does take him a little while to get up to speed, A, they can't really demote him anywhere. B, I don't know who you'd replace him with. And I think that's all. I don't need any other answers, actually. A and B are enough for me to cover his back.
Yeah, he's relatively secure. The only people that are really going to be gunning for that seat are Iwasa and Sonoda. But again, I
Don't see either of those happening.
no, if the car's not great, I can't see either of them particularly wanting to hang around either. So, yeah, very interesting times in that sense. With the podium picked, we still appoint points for fastest lap. And Thiemo, who do you think is going to complete a circuit of Albert Park in the shortest amount of time during the Grand Prix?
Didn't give him a podium, but I thought I'd give him a fastest lap, so George Russell. I still think the Mercedes is going to be quick. I just think because of the nature of the race, he's going to get beaten by the other three drivers up on the podium, but he's going to have fun chasing them down. And he still might finish P4, maybe P4 with the fastest lap.
Yeah, reasonable shout. I've gone for Lewis Hamilton. I
Who you've also not put on your podium. So are you borrowing my logic?
Similar logic, yeah. I can just see him having a bit of a struggle early on in the Grand Prix, finding a rhythm, really locking into it, and making up for a lot of lost time and distance. And during that point, we'll see him sort of storm through, make some fastest laps, and be a bit of a threat. And I think that we're going to be on tenterhooks watching Antonelli versus Hamilton for third. And I think it's going to come down to a bit of an awkward scrap towards the end. And that's possibly why we're going to see the podium outcome that we do. A slightly more cautious and mature Hamilton isn't going to throw it all away on the opening Grand Prix of the season. A young and exuberant Kimi Antonelli, who's on for a podium finish, might be a little more inclined to sort of overstep the mark and sort of therefore get away with it. So I think it's going to be an interesting outcome in that sense. Caitlin?
I'm going George Russell 2 for 2. I think he's winning the race and he's getting fastest lap. I think that he's going to have a pretty good weekend overall. And I think it's going to be, I think it's going to be a good start for him. I'm not sure how it'll keep going for him, but I think certainly this weekend he'll be quite happy with it.
Do you reckon the Mercedes form and George's form coming into this season is going to make him the driver to chase as we get to sort of halfway through the first part of the year? Do you think sort of by, say, Spain, Monaco, he's going to be the driver that a lot of people are gunning to catch up with if those Mercedes engine regulations take effect and we see Mercedes drop back? Is he going to be the people we're sort of counting down the races to drivers overtaking him?
I do think so. I do think that he will be very much at the forefront this year. I am interested, like picking up on earlier on talking about Lando Norris and McLaren. I am interested to see if the same thing happens, the same pattern happens of taking a few races to get into it, and whether he starts to, catch up again and make his way towards the forefront, or whether he'll be there from the start. Like, I'm really interested to see how that pans out and whether there's a little fight going on between the two of them, which I think would be really, really interesting. But I do think that George will be the one to beat going into the second half of the season. And I think it's going to be a shock to the system for some people. I do think it's going to be very, very interesting to watch.
Yeah,
I do think it'd be quite fun if we got Russell at that kind of form, Hamilton back up to his usual standards, and then if McLaren can deliver the car, to get Norris in the mix a little bit, purely in time for Silverstone, so that we can get a semi-repeat of 22, and then have it labelled and forever known afterwards as Battle of the Britons.
I
it
would
would
love that.
be fantastic to have that. And I think we've got enough time before the British Grand Prix, which sort of falls remarkably sort of late in the first half of the season, I think, to sort of have that chance to be quite an exciting battle as sort of a lot of
And if Haas are as quick as they look, throw Behrman into the mix. If Williams get their act together, we can get him in there. And if Lindblad's just lost somewhere maybe, and he's trying to figure out how he got into the top six, we've got all of them then going at it. We can have the ultimate kind of fight on home soil.
it could be something special indeed. Speaking of that slightly wild concept, though, we always lay down a wild prediction. Thiemo, I'll let you go with your first wild prediction of the 2026 season.
I will go for it, and I will then circle back to you because I don't think yours is wild enough for a wild prediction 2026. I think we've got to go up on the ante this year, so you've got to think of something more wild. My wild prediction, considering everything that we've got going on at the moment, is that at least one Aston Martin makes it to the end of the Grand Prix, which you got to say is a good benchmark for me for the rest of the season if we're going for outlandish predictions.
It's a solid return to form for you. My prediction, as it's written down, is three DNFs, not including Aston Martin. So that's five cars out, very nearly a quarter of the field, which
Yeah,
I
but if you're
think
not
is.
including Aston Martin, that's only three, and we did that easy last year and in 23. So come on your bike, get something a bit wilder on there. Just up the number, if anything. If you don't want to think too far outside the box, just up the number. That's more like it.
Cadillac double top 10 finish in their opening Grand Prix. How about that then for a wild prediction?
I would take that, and Haas would be annoyed at that because they've currently got the best record from that.
Yeah, for an opening Grand Prix, they had a very strong start when they arrived in
Would
Australia
it be
in
the
16.
best opening performance since technically Brawn in 2009?
It's probably going to be up there, yeah, for a
We've
team
not
just.
really had that many new teams since then that have been that successful straight
Yeah.
out the gate.
And you at that point have to like probably go back to the likes of sort of Lotus in the 60s, or if not, go to the 1950 British Grand Prix, the first one ever held, and go, well, they've started well because you've got no track record to go from.
I always like the idea of labelling likes of Fangio and Ascari as rookies in that season
Yeah, in
because
theory,
technically they were.
yeah, yeah. The rookie test before the year must have been absolutely incredible. Just imagine doing Grill the Grid in 1950. But anyway, yeah, there you go. Cadillac double top 10 finish in the opening Grand Prix of the year. I think it's going to be an interesting sort of line in the sand for them to try and live up to as the rest of the year goes by. And again, they've got the strong power unit for this season, it looks like. An experienced driver lineup, a team that seems to be relatively functional and cooperative, despite the fact that some of them were at Silverstone today.
You're talking your wild prediction into being less wild here. You should just left it at Cadillac double top 10 and
Yeah,
just walked
but
away.
at the same time, some of them were at Silverstone today making a giant chocolate Formula One car. So I think sort of the nuttiness of it balances out. Caitlin, your wild prediction.
So I'm going out with a bang because I understand the concept of a wild prediction. So I am going to
That's
go ahead
fired.
and say Ollie Behrman is going to get P4. He's going to be knocking at the door to get on that podium. And I'm going to wish it into existence and it's going to happen. I need to be right for once. It's
You
a
did
wild
understand the
prediction. We're going
assignment.
I did. Thank you. I'm very proud of that one.
Yeah, I'd be happy if that comes true. I think we can have all of our wild predictions happen. This is one of those sort of rare occurrences where all of our wild predictions could happen in a Grand Prix, and we'd be on for a very interesting time at that
Yeah,
We're
if there's
just trying
ever
to
going to be
emulate
one.
Murray Walker's quote from yesteryear, you know, anything can happen in Grand Prix racing, and it usually does, and we're trying to make everything happen at once.
Yeah,
And given how it went last year, there's absolutely every chance that these could happen. So if we're going to go for it, we might as well.
yeah, very, very real chance that it could all come together. Um, well, it's looking like it's going to be a very interesting Grand Prix weekend. Unfortunately, it's all taking place at sort of 4 o'clock in the morning most of the time, so it's going to be a very early coffee-fueled weekend for the Grand Prix start to the season. But after that, we of course move on to China and then Japan, and then
To be confirmed.
probably Imola and Portimao. Let's be realistic here. I mean, what there's a Tom Clancy plot happening in the Middle East. We're not going to go and hold a Grand Prix there, so we're almost certainly going to be heading to Italy for the fourth round, and then the fifth round will be held in Portimao. So interesting times. And with some wild predictions and some regular predictions laid down, as well as a quick look at the Formula One news, that brings us to the end of this week's podcast. And we'll be back with a review of the Australian Grand Prix. We'll be recording that on the Monday evening after the Grand Prix. Do we have a guest for that yet, Thiemo?
You know I'm not going to tell the ladies and gentlemen listening to this. They'll have to come back and find out. That's how we keep them coming.
We're not going to
Well, it's not, but it's one of the reasons we get them coming back anyway, hopefully.
We're going to give them a little tease ahead of time. Anyway, if the people want something to keep them occupied between then and now, as alongside the Australian Grand Prix, Thiemo, where can the people find you if they want more of your lovely, lovely content?
That I will tell people about. This week on the Curbs with Formula Careers, where I chat with James Winepress, who is the former composites design group leader for Red Bull and the former program operations manager for Aston Martin. And also, as Caitlin will also probably be, over on the Paddock Chronicle, where I've got my most recent article on the key takeaways from the opening round of the IndyCar season from St. Pete's, as well as obviously the latest episode of On the Curbs IndyCar, where Nate Woods and I review said race.
Wonderful stuff. And Caitlin, if people want more from you, where can you be found?
You can find me at the Paddock Chronicle, either on social media or on the website, which is thepaddockkchronicle.com. And I will be most likely just overseeing all the content this weekend, but that is where you may find me.
Perfect. And if you want more from me, you can pick up the latest issue of Classic Car Weekly. That's on shop shelves every Wednesday. This week's one does have the MG back in it after a long and busy winter of getting along to shows and events. And also you can listen to the Classic Car Weekly podcast. I recorded a special edition of it yesterday up at the Practical Classics workshop, where we were rudely interrupted by the RAF's red arrows halfway through. But that will be coming out in due course on our channels. We'll be recording the regular podcast. I think we're doing that Friday morning, so that'll be out as well. Plus, you can obviously find me on social media at Jesse on Cars for additional content, mostly relating to cars. Thank you very much for listening, and like I said, we'll be back soon with a review of the Australian Grand Prix.